The Saramonic UWMic9 is one of the most budget-friendly wireless mic systems currently you can buy on the market. But are they any good? I wanted to find out because I wanted a dedicated kit for myself whenever I'm doing remote shoots or doing any type of freelance work. And I have to say I was pleasantly surprised with this system. Is this the best microphone I've ever used? Of course not. Money buys better audio equipment. That's just simply how it is. But for a budget-friendly package, I have to say this was a phenomenal device, especially for people that are doing either low-end work or kind of some beginner work. This will get you kind of going in the right direction anyway. Now, there are a lot of different kits available for the UWMic9. One of my favorites is the kit that comes with a receiver as well as two transmitters. It uses stereo for the left channel for one mic, the right channel for another mic, and you can use both of those channels simultaneously. I think that's something that's so incredibly cool because it also allows you to do two microphones with essentially just one camera or one recording device if that's all you really have. Now, I didn't really do a whole lot of research going into this, so I was incredibly curious if it was any good when I opened up the packaging. And I have to say that build quality was a lot better than I suspected. It's a firm case around it. The one weak point is the battery sled or battery tray. That I could see breaking very, very easily. But the actual mic itself, incredibly well designed. In fact, I would almost say that the build quality on the UWMic9 is better than the Sennheiser, much more expensive kit out there just in terms of build quality. Audio quality, of course, I'll still give to the Sennheiser, which I used for more than 3 years on my last job. Now, by default, the volume on the receiver was a bit loud by default and always came off as a bit overmodulated no matter how much I turned on the actual audio settings inside the camera.
Half hour, we had the official green light that we were going to begin evacuation of the hospital. We had over 45 ambulance services and ambulances here, and I'd say at least 90% of them were not actually asked by us to come here.
What I did find to be a pretty happy volume was about 24. That seemed to be a pretty good number for people that are quite loud, like myself, or people that are a little bit calmer when they talk. 24 seems to be a pretty good number all around when it comes to the volume setting on the receiver. Now, by default, there are 96 different channels that these devices work on. You can't manipulate like the step-by-step point of frequency that you can on, say, the Sennheiser kits, but there are 96 channels you can choose from all the way across the 500 megahertz range. And I typically have found that the higher numbers, like the 580s and 90s, definitely sound a little bit better than the lower volumes, like the 5 teens. Shooting for the higher frequency numbers seem to have a little bit better. And when you think about it like a radio in a car, that kind of makes sense, right? The lower frequency radio stations, like those 80s and low 90s, like those NPR stations and those like really rural religious stations, those tend to not have quite the volume as well as the clarity as, say, the higher end frequencies like the 100s, like the 100.1, 100.4, or 104 point whatever. Those tend to sound a little bit better, and that's kind of a similar situation with this kit as well. Those higher frequencies definitely sound a little bit better. Now, these microphones use AA batteries, for better or worse. On the plus side, you can use pretty much any AA batteries on the market, which is a really good economic option, so you don't have to use dedicated batteries, say on like a camera battery. But of course, it doesn't come with batteries that you have to use. So just keep in mind that you have to factor in at least some batteries in your price, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to get some dedicated rechargeable batteries. Now, speaking of batteries, I also have to say that the battery life seems to be really high-end, and I've shot probably, maybe 10, 15 interviews plus a music video, and I've had no issues with batteries running out. So I will say the battery life on these seem very, very good, as long as you remember to turn them off. The belt clips on these microphones seem very, very sturdy. I've had no issues with them falling off or anything like that. They're even a bit on the tighter side, which I prefer because over time they will wear down a little bit. Very, very sturdy, and I've had no issues with them falling out. And of course, you can always put them in a pocket, but one thing I would recommend is make sure it's not near a cell phone in a close by pocket. That's with any microphone kit. But I have noticed that with this one in particular, it seems to be a bit more, shall I say, sensitive to cell phones in close proximity to the microphones. Now, one other downside with these is that they are a bit heavy compared to other things like Sennheisers on the market. And for the most part, that really doesn't affect anything, especially if you're clipping it on a belt or putting it in a pocket. But if for some reason weight is going to be an issue with the microphone itself, keep that in mind. They are a bit on the beefier side compared to others on the market. One reason why I really like this microphone setup too for DSLRs is that most DSLRs, at least the mid to higher end ones, have a dedicated microphone in port, but they don't have a monitoring port. The receiver on this kit actually has a microphone port that you can plug in just generic earbuds to listen to the audio. And I think that's just such a nice little touch that this very budget item has that even some of those mid to even higher end range ones do not have included on them, which is, I think, again, a really nice addition. Now, of course, everybody wants to know range. Range, I would say, is quite acceptable for these microphones. I'm shooting at 150 millimeters to try and get that bokeh effect behind me, and so I'm standing a pretty good distance away from where an interviewer would be, and I've obviously had no issues with this microphone here. I think it sounds fine. I would suggest that you keep it within about 100 feet. That seems to be the really comfortable zone in which it works really quite well, especially when you're using higher frequencies. So right now we're shooting in channel B on channel 96 at 596 megahertz. And you'll notice that the farther I get away, that is where this frequency tends to work a little bit better. The higher frequencies will work better at greater distances. And so right now I'm at about the 100-foot mark, and this is about as far as I would comfortably say you could utilize these microphones without many issues. But 100 feet, I would suggest is pretty good. And you'll see that at 100 feet, I can kind of walk, and it's really no issues in terms of working either. One thing you do kind of want to keep in mind is that as you get to these kind of farther distances, you want to try and keep the transmitter as at least pointed towards the receiver as well as possible and make sure the antenna is vertical. Now we can kind of try and maximize this a little bit, so we can kind of push the distance a little bit more. And you'll notice as I turn around, you may get more static, more hiss and dropouts. So we're going to keep walking here, and what we're going to do is push it to 200 feet. Again, I'm walking away from the microphone right now. And so this is the microphone at about 200 feet. And again, the greater distances that you are, you're going to get more dropouts and hiss at 200 feet, but those higher frequencies will work better. So at 514 megahertz, we're going to keep walking away. We're going to keep walking away at this point. And one thing I can tell you is that within about 100 feet, you're going to have no issues with this mic. Even when you're kind of turning away, the receiver and the microphone not being close to each other or focused towards each other, you're still going to be okay. But once you get closer to that 100-foot mark, again, that's kind of where I would recommend to be the max distance of being comfortable with this mic in terms of distance. I would say that within 100 feet, if you're doing little to no movement, I'd say this is pretty good. But inside 100 feet, I mean, you can still walk a little bit, move a little bit, maybe turn away a little bit, and you're not going to have the worst issues. But as we get further away, this is when those higher frequencies really begin to excel. When you turn that frequency up to those 590 range, that's when you can get something closer to about 150 feet, which is where I'm at now. So at 150 feet, it'll still probably work, still probably come in, but as you kind of turn the transmitter away from the receiver and you have some interference issues with that, that's when you're going to start having more dropouts. And so at this range, I would not consider that 514 low-end range to be usable. And of course, one thing to note as you kind of get closer, you can still do walk and talks. You can still have some movement with these microphones without many major issues, especially if you're going to be somewhere where you would be with a more typical interview, something like this, maybe 20 to 30 feet away. So bottom line with the Saramonic UWMic9, it's a great budget-friendly wireless microphone system. If you're doing any shoots or planning any shoots within about 100 feet, I have absolutely no issues. Even at great distances, closer to 200 feet, I still have very few issues out there, and even upwards of 300 feet at those higher frequencies, as you kind of saw in the test, it still sounds pretty darn good, but I would say that I wouldn't trust that full recommended length by the manufacturer. I would still try and keep these within 100 feet for the best ideal systems. Again, you cannot beat the price for how these perform. They really do work well. The build quality is really, really well. And what's really nice is how easy it is to change the settings on the microphone and the transmitter. It's pretty similar to most systems. There's no real awkward menu settings or anything like that. Real easy to change the things as you go. And as I was kind of doing this shoot, you probably saw it, I was constantly jumping back between Group A, Group B, channels 1 to 96. I was jumping around quite a bit, and I was able to do it really in a pretty timely fashion. So in terms of recommendations for these microphones, it's a tough thing to sell because audio is so important in a person's workflow. If you have the greatest video in the world, but it relies on interviews, and you have just that one pop at just the worst possible moment, that can ruin the whole production. I don't have the greatest confidence if you're doing professional grade stuff with these microphones. If you're doing professional stuff, you should have a bigger budget to get those higher, more expensive and well-known names. But if you're doing things on YouTube, if you're doing kind of personal projects here and there, or maybe doing a little bit of freelance work here and there where, you know, you're not talking about big budget items and all of that, I do think these microphones really do work really well. And for the budget, it's really quite remarkable. And having the versatility of having wireless where you can walk around and not be confined and basically cabled to the computer or the camera, it really does help that much. I hope you found this video informative and interesting. I have to say, I have really no plans of switching these out because the things I do aren't really, you know, blockbuster items for that matter. But you just have to understand that there is some compromises with these microphones. Most notably, I think with range and overall reliability, I think is a big drawback as well.
But we were something, don't you think so? Rolling 20s, toss some pennies in the pool. And if the wishes came true, oh, it would have been you.
And of course the warnings went off again. We went back downstairs.
Then the phone started kind of going off, and okay, so be aware of what's going on.
It was sunny out. Everything seemed to be fine.
You know, you never think it's going to happen.
But it looked like the storm was headed sort of not towards Marshalltown, more towards Albion.